Hi. I was reminded last night of a funny story and then another one. Um, some years ago, I went to spend some time with my grandmother's last living friend. They had gone to Chevy Chase together in the New England Conservatory. And Sally had been married to her husband for over 60 years. She was in her 80s. Um, and it was funny. We were having tea one afternoon, and with her tea had a couple of shots of bourbon in it. And I, asked her how she and George were doing, her husband. And she said, she said George has had some problems for a number of years. And she said, I'm a romantic. I loved him, all these years. And we had a wonderful sex life together. And she was being very frank with me, which was surprising. Um, because my grandmother and her never talked about sex while I was around, but I knew they were when they would be quiet when I would walk in the room. So she was expressing, some mourning over, the loss of their physical life together. And, contrary to popular belief, the elderly have libidos too. And I had been given a six-pack sample of Viagra and by one of my friends. And I had it in the bag, and I, talked to her for a few minutes, and I asked her if George had any heart problems. So I said, well, I understand these are very helpful. I hadn't reached a point where I benefited from them, so I wasn't taking them myself at that point. So I gave her them, and I, gave her the instructions. And it was about 3 days later, she called me and she said, you are an angel. She said, I gave George that miracle medicine you left with me last night. And she said, honey, the South did rise again. And, he stayed alive for another 4 or 5 years. And she would periodically call me and she would ask me for some of that miracle medicine because the doctor that she and George had was an evangelical Christian who didn't think that people who were not procreating should be making love. And so naturally I went, okay, I will be her supplier. But, it enhanced the last years of them being together in their marriage. Um, my grandmother, when she got Alzheimer's disease, I had to be the one to put her into a care facility. My mom just couldn't do it, and it was really difficult. My grandmother broke a lot of rules. A woman of her class, she danced on stage. She went to the New England Conservatory of Music. And she got a master's in theory and composition. She was quite a lady. And the nursing home called me one day, and it's like, your grandmother is missing. And I was out driving my cab at the time, and the nurse added, and she was dressed to the nines when she left here. So I went out and, looked around, and I'm like, where could she be? And first I went to the apartment, and she wasn't there. And then I thought about it because she had been talking to me about, her days in the theater. She was still a little bit lucid at that point. So I went to one of the theaters in Boston and I saw something in the alley around the stage entrance. And I got out and it was my grandmother. And she was standing at the stage door waiting to be let in so she could do her performance. And I looked at her and I'm like, well, I said, I think they may have closed for the night. I said, I think this might be some kind of holiday. And she looked very sad. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, why don't you do your bit for me? And so she started to dance around and sing to me. And it was just the most beautiful experience. So I got her into the taxi and I took her to Brigham's, which is an ice cream parlor in Boston, and I got her her favorite frap. And it's not a frappe, it's a frap, okay? Um, and I got her back to the nursing home. And there was this nurse there that reminded me of Nurse Diesel from High Anxiety, and she had the Virgin Mary medallion on her neck. And she came up to me and she said, I think that you encourage your grandmother to, break these boundaries. And I'm like, my grandmother never needed any encouragement, even before the onset of Alzheimer's. And so I was talking to her as I got my grandmother back to the room, and she, got dressed with the help of one of the aides. And, the curtain came back and she was in her negligee. And this nurse turned to me and she said, and that's another thing. You have got to stop buying your grandmother negligees. And I'm like, she loves negligees. I said, it's all she's ever worn her entire life when she goes to bed. And she said, yes, but it's exciting Mr. Bernstein down the hall. And I looked at her and I said, Anne, I said, if Mr. Bernstein goes out fantasizing about my grandmother or actually doing it with her, he's going to die a happy man. You need to leave those old people alone and you need to keep your religious hang-ups to yourself. She hated me after that. But it's like, it's a thing that all of us, overlook. A lot of people have the ooh factor with it. But love is something that goes on in people's lives until the day they die. Rocking chair grandmas, a lot of times when they're just going back and forth in the chair, and you see that glazed look in their eyes, they're remembering some experience they had with a beautiful young love, and they draw back on that. And it brings out certain passions that, though seasoned by years, are still youthful. And I think in this country where we become Puritan by osmosis, almost, or Roman Catholic, it's just, you know, touch but don't taste, look but don't touch, all that stuff. It's just, you know, in its proper setting and, in its moment. It's a beautiful thing for people of any age. I miss seeing Dr. Ruth on the TV because she really put things into perspective. But those are just a few memories that I had when I was out with my friends last night that I wanted to share. So thank you very much.